And again, thank you all for being here. We're excited to have Amy Salinas and Jennifer Calvert with us, who are going to be talking all about AmeriCorps grant writing. I will just pass it off to our presenters to take it away. Thanks so much.
Great. All right, we'll get this started. Good afternoon, everyone. I really appreciate that you're joining us today for the first of our 4 series webinars on the topic of AmeriCorps grant writing, for which today's topic will be about AmeriCorps grants and budget development 101. And before we get started on the topics, we want to take a few minutes to do what we call build the learning environment. So I'd like to start with some introductions. I know we only have, I think, one additional person on this call. So I'd love to just take a minute, or it looks like 2,
We
maybe
have about
more,
10,
actually
Amy.
more.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm just not seeing it on the screen. There we go. There's
Actually,
a
there's
lot of
27
people.
total.
Great. So to change of path I was going to take, I would love for you all to put in the chat your responses to the things you see on the screen, your name, organization. If you can talk about your experience with AmeriCorps, and then also your experience with writing the AmeriCorps grant. And I gave you a few like example prompts you could use to respond to the 3rd and 4th item. So go ahead and take just about a minute to put your responses in the chat, just so we can get a sense of who's on this session. Great. Hi, Cassidy. Hi, Caitlin. Listen here, none. All right. All right, Jennifer, no experience with either, where we welcome you. Okay. So I have a mix. Some have had a little bit, and it looks like most are no experience with the grant. Okay. Thank you so much for sharing your information. We're really excited to see the diversity of people that are coming to this webinar. Some with absolutely no experience in this world, and so we recognize that this will be a good learning experience for you all. It'll be a good learning experience for everyone, but it'll actually be a larger learning curve for you. So feel free to ask questions as we take time to do so. And then some of you have done continuation grants. Some of you have done one full grant. Looks like there's, yeah, I don't know if I see anyone who's written a lot of multiple grant cycles. There you go, Ashley. You're an experienced one. You can also offer insight and as we go on. All right, great. Thank you for that. Just to tell you a little bit about ourselves, I'm Amy Salinas, and I'm one of the presenters for the next 4 sessions. I live in Austin, Texas, and I've been in the AmeriCorps world for 30 years now and do a lot of work around grant support to organizations and to state commissions. Was an AmeriCorps member, worked for an AmeriCorps program, and worked at a state commission in Texas, and have been doing consulting for many years. I'll let Jennifer introduce herself.
Good afternoon. Like Amy, I've been in the AmeriCorps field a long time, about 23 years now. I'm also an AmeriCorps alum and then was a program director for a number of years for 2 AmeriCorps state programs within Texas. I'm also from Austin, and each of the AmeriCorps programs that I was a program director for had approximately 100 members serving in the educational focus area. And then started doing full-time consulting in 2016, a lot of that in conjunction with Amy, as she discussed the grantees that we work with in state commissions across the country.
Great, thanks, Jennifer. And are there any other Serve Washington staff that would like to introduce themselves? I know Lou, you already introduced yourself, Diane, and anybody else?
Sure, I can say hi really quick. Diane Trujillo, Director of Programs with Serve Washington, and I've been with the commission since May, and I previously was a program director for one of our current sub-grantees, Serve Tri-Cities, and I was there about 5.5 years. And I am so excited that you all are here today, and thank you again for being willing to do this.
Anyone else on the commission that popped on? I didn't see.
Yeah, this is Thomas. Um, I'm the grants officer. A lot of the budget stuff ends up trickling down to me during the application process. So I just kind of want to keep an eye on things, know what information is out there. Thanks.
Great, Thomas. Thanks so much. Anybody else? And we're going to go ahead and get started. We're going to talk through quickly the agenda. We're going to talk about some just really basic fundamentals around AmeriCorps 101 and AmeriCorps funding, application 101, and then talk about understanding the review process. And all of this is regardless of whether you're applying for a competitive application that review happens on a national level, or what we call formula application. We'll talk about this in a second. That's on a state level. So we're really trying to make this hit all the different types of applications you might write or funding cycles you may apply for. And then we're going to talk about what you should do before you begin your application, as you write your application, as you approach that deadline, some just a little checklist of things you need to make sure you focus on, and a few final things you need to know. And then we're going to transition to some budget 101 pieces at the end. And throughout, we're going to take opportunities to answer questions. So when you see this slide, we'll pause and see if there are any questions that come about from the content we've delivered. But also, if you all have any questions as we're going through the content and you don't want to forget them, feel free to submit them in the chat. And when we get to that point, we'll stop and see if any have come up that we need to address. Also, if you have questions now that you want to make sure we address, either at this session or at one of the future sessions, please do not also hesitate to put that in the chat, because we can use those questions to guide content that we provide. All right. So as we talk about writing an AmeriCorps grant, it really first requires that you understand some of the foundation information that guides what AmeriCorps programs do and what they should be about. So we're going to begin our time by starting first with an overview of some important AmeriCorps elements, some of which I know some of you know a lot about, and some of which I know some of you know nothing about. So we'll bear with us as we talk about this. So first, one of the things you should be aware of, if you're not already, is that AmeriCorps programming typically fits within one or more of the focus areas you see on the screen. For the most part, these focus areas are what we call labels, for lack of a better word, and don't have a huge impact on the application itself. However, they will show up for you when you look to decide what performance measures you are going to select. These are things that you're going to have to report on as a part of your operational grant. And they're divided, the performance measures are divided into these categories, these focus areas, plus there's a capacity building category. We're not going to spend our time walking through the details of each of the focus areas, but we've included some of these details in the following slides that I'm going to quickly go through, but for which you all can look at in more detail after this session, because we'll be sharing the slides with you when this is done, in addition to the recording. And so the first focus area is disaster services, helping people to either prepare, get ready, or recover from disasters or mitigate disasters. The second focus area is economic opportunity, which are programs that help people who are needing support in financial literacy, transitioning into or remaining in affordable housing, or improving employability, to name a few. We have AmeriCorps programs that fall in the education realm, from before kindergarten to K through 12 to college access and success, and everything that falls within those three different age groups. We have some programs that fall under the environmental stewardship category that do a whole host of things, including, ecosystem improvements, energy efficiency, water consumption, and more. We have programs that fall under the Healthy Futures focus area, and that includes, helping people increase their physical activity, improve youth nutrition, to helping seniors stay and people with disabilities remain in their homes, improving primary and preventative health care, and more. We also have a category of veterans and military families that's either working directly with veterans and military family members to support them in different ways, or having as a crucial part of their program members as veterans or military families. And those activities have a wide range of things that they do. So those are the main buckets of programming that AmeriCorps programs fit into. Again, the only area that really truly impacts is your performance measure selection, which we'll talk more about on a future webinar. And while AmeriCorps programs may differ in their focus areas that I just talked about, they also come in many different sizes and shapes. There are still some really key fundamentals that guide and shape all of AmeriCorps programs, no matter what their focus area, no matter their size, no matter their scope. And we often refer to these things you see here as the legs of the stool, because if you're missing one or more legs, your stool falls over. And these legs really make AmeriCorps what it is. These legs are get things done, strengthening communities, strong member experience, specifically encouraging responsibility and expanding opportunity, and then brand and core identification. We're not going to talk more about these legs today, but we're going to come back to them on the other sessions in the series because they show up in some different ways, particularly in the narrative and the logic model and the budget. All right, so another thing that's important for you all to understand about the AmeriCorps grant is how programs are funded. And I started to introduce that with some verbiage just a few minutes ago. All AmeriCorps programs are either funded in what we call the competitive pool of dollars or the formula pool of dollars. Now, AmeriCorps, the federal agency, issues its notice of funding opportunity in the fall of each year. So that the fall of 2024 was an example for which state commissions like Serve Washington then release theirs at some point after that so that applicants can compete in a national competition against applications from other states and also applications from organizations that operate in multiple states. So that's what's called the competitive funding pool. That competition has specific criteria and requirements, and the deadline is typically in January of each year, and that's already passed. Okay, so that's one pool of dollars that AmeriCorps programs can vie for. The second one is the formula pool. Each state commission has formula dollars that are based on state population. So with these dollars, each state commission issues an announcement for their own state competition where organizations can apply against other organizations just in their state. So they're not competing across the country. This competition also has specific criteria and requirements that either sometimes is the same as the competitive pool, or it may differ slightly, or it may differ a lot from what was issued by AmeriCorps for those competitive pool of dollars. And we say all of this to let you know that every year what is asked for can vary. So we will not be talking in these sessions to specific notices, but instead to really good practices that help your application be stronger regardless of what comes out in each competition. So, and regardless of what the specific criteria are in each competition. Additionally, there are different application types you might be submitting from year to year, and with each type also comes different requirements. Some of you may notice that people in the chat were saying they've just done a continuation application or they've done a recompete. So that's the verbiage that we're talking about right now. New programs are those that have not previously received an AmeriCorps state or national grant, or they're not currently managing an AmeriCorps state or national program, or they may be submitting an application for a program design or funding type for which they've never previously received AmeriCorps funding. So that's new. The second one is recompete applications, and those are for current AmeriCorps programs that are entering the final year of their 3-year grant project period, who are now required to submit another application if they wish to be considered for future AmeriCorps funding. So it's called a recompete. You're recompeting for another 3 years. So this process is known as recompetition. Programs that are not a current grantee but have received a competitive AmeriCorps grant in the past 5 years would also be considered a recompete. Recompeting programs are reminded regularly that having a program currently and submitting an application does not guarantee success in securing future funding. You still have to write a competitive application and do well as an operational program. In general terms, the application and what you submit is similar, but for recompete programs, there are increased expectations around match, around evidence, and around evaluation. Continuation applications are for current AmeriCorps programs who are in year 1 or year 2 of their 3-year AmeriCorps grant. If 3 years is what they're originally funded for, which typically AmeriCorps programs are funded for a 3-year cycle, contingent upon successful programming. And so they have to submit a continuation application in their first 2 years. And the application is different than a new or recompete application. Again, funding is not guaranteed, but it's different. It's less. It just requires some updates from what was previously submitted, and if any changes were made, changes that need to be talked about. And then there's another category called planning grants, and that's something that organizations can select in advance if they're if it's a part of the notice of funding opportunity that the State Service Commission puts out. Or if a state service commission might decide that an organization who submitted a new application wasn't exactly ready to go operational, but maybe that they, with planning time, could be a really good AmeriCorps program. State commissions also have the ability to consider that as an option. And then finally, here's a list of organization types that are eligible to apply for AmeriCorps funding. So nonprofit organizations, schools or districts, higher education institutions, government agencies, and Indian tribes. All right, so we've gone through some just basic AmeriCorps and Application 101. We want to now pause to see if you all have any questions or if any questions came in the chat. I don't see any questions in the chat. Does anyone have questions or they want to ask and unmute their mic? Okay. We'll have another space to pause in just a minute. So we're going to now ground you in a few application fundamentals. So first, it's important to understand that with each notice of funding opportunity, which Serve Washington calls the RFGA, there are a series of documents that are a part of it, regardless of if it is in the competitive pool or the formula pool that we talked about just a few minutes ago. And the things you see on the screen are the documents that are typically released annually that are a part of the whole package of information that you need to read, understand, and follow. And I'm going to say that one more time because it's really important. These are all items that are issued as a part of the whole notice of funding opportunity, or what Serve Washington calls in their formula application, the RFGA. And these are things that you should read in their entirety as you write the application. So it's not just the notice, the RFGA that Serve Washington will issue. It's the application instructions, it's the performance measure instructions. It's what's called the mandatory supplemental information, which is kind of like a thesaurus, a dictionary of, key terms or requirements that are mentioned that you might need more details about. And the evaluation plan template, and there are a few others usually, but these are kind of the main categories. Second, there are also resources that can support your learning on one or more of the application elements. So whether you're brand new or you've been at the AmeriCorps program but never written a new or recompete grant, these are resources that you all can access. There are technical assistance webinars that AmeriCorps always does as a part of their competitive funding pool that they put recordings of after they have happened. So you can go to their website and find those recordings. Serve Washington is also providing these webinars for you all, for which there will also be recordings for each of them that you can access and take advantage of. And each of you all also has the ability to access courses on the AmeriCorps application through On3 Learn. If you're an existing AmeriCorps program or you're considering an application, you all can take these courses and learn more about the elements. We have a series of applicant courses on Is Our Organization a Fit for new programs, and we also have courses on the major application elements like the narrative, the logic model, the performance measures, and the budget. And then we have a couple of more deep dive courses on the budget that are under the staff catalog, which you could also take. So those are just a few of the resources that are available to you, in addition, of course, to one another, which is one of the greatest resources. Third, there are a few systems in which you need to navigate within to be a successful applicant. So first, all applicants must register with the System for Award Management, which is called SAM, and maintain an active SAM registration until the application process is complete. If an applicant is awarded a grant, it must maintain an active SAM registration throughout the life of the award. And there's a guide for grantees for more information, and you can see a link here. AmeriCorps suggests that applicants finalize that new registration or renew an existing one at least, and I'd say even longer, 3 weeks before the application deadline, just to allow time to resolve any issues that may arise. You must use your SAM registered legal name and physical address on all grant applications to AmeriCorps. And that legal applicant name and physical address, this is super important to hear and know, in the grant system must exactly match what's in the SAM registered information. If there's differences, you're gonna have some complications. Applications must include a valid unique entity identifier, a UEI, which is generated as a part of that SAM registration process. And AmeriCorps will not make awards to entities who do not have that registration, that SAM registration, and the UEI. Applications must include their employer identification number also. So the UEI and what we call the EIN must be entered by the organization's grantee administrator. And this will apply the information to all applications for the organization. And to be successful with the submission, all of your application elements, all applicants must have an eGrants account to apply. And you must have an eGrants account, which is AmeriCorps' web-based application system. To submit all the things that we're going to be talking about, you must also have an account in eGrants. And there's a link here on the screen. Again, we're going to send these slides out afterwards. Within the eGrant system, which again is the AmeriCorps system to enter your grant application elements and submit your full application, there are several elements that make up the entire AmeriCorps application, each of which has its unique requirements and details. There is the narrative, the logic model, the performance measures, the budget, source of match funds, and some required funding, demographic, program information, and document status. So those are like the main, what we call modules in eGrants that you have to complete. And each of them, again, has specific things that they're asking for. There are also other items that you typically have to submit or do outside of eGrants that will be detailed in the yearly notice that comes out, which is why it's important to read everything so you know what's required and how it's required. And because if you don't submit it, it can impact your ability to be funded. Outside of eGrants, typically there's a survey that grantees have to complete called the Operational and Financial Management Survey. This year and last year, it was an online survey that you completed that you had to do before the deadline. And then typically there are some additional documents that are detailed in the notice of funding opportunity. The additional documents that you submit or might have to submit depend on many factors. What you see on the screen are some of the additional documents you might have to submit depending upon their applicability to you. These additional documents are emailed and have specific requirements on how they're labeled and what is included as a header to each document. And again, all of this is written down in that notice of funding opportunity document. It could be evidence documents that are referenced in your narrative. It could be a labor union concurrence if that's applicable. It could be an evaluation plan or report. Again, each of these documents have to be labeled in a specific way and have a heading with specific details that are outlined in the details of the notice. And like I said before, there's another submission requirement that has been a part of the AmeriCorps submission for a few years, regardless if you're competing in the competitive or formula pool. It's that operational and financial management survey. And it's completed online right now. And you can also download a version, which I'd recommend doing for all of you all, just so you can see the questions in advance and work with your team to answer the questions. And then you could go in and do the survey. So you're not, you have all the tools you need to submit it successfully ahead of time. And then Serve Washington might outline other additional documents or requirements in their notice that they're going to be issuing for their formula pool. So again, it's really important that you read all the documents thoroughly. All right. Want to pause again and see if there are any questions. I don't see any that have come up in the chat. Oh, pause for a few seconds to see if anybody asks a question verbally. No. All right, the following, so we want to talk to you. We're going to, in the following sessions that we're going to be doing, we'll talk about specific individual grant elements like the narrative, the logic model, performance measures, and budget. But today we want to talk in general about a few things, and we also want to talk specifically about the review process. So as you write your grant elements, you understand what happens once they're submitted. So first, it's really important to understand that the people who review your application. Typically, there's also a staff review. So on a formula level, Serve Washington staff are reviewing your grant elements. But there is also a peer review process. And these peer reviewers don't probably know anything about your program, or they may have heard about your organization, but they don't know the details about your AmeriCorps program. They likely are not experts in your focus area, and they're not there to be experts per se. They're reviewing solely based on criteria that was published in the notice and what is it they're expected to review against. They don't always read all the elements, so it's really important that you don't say like, oh, I talked about it here, I'm not going to talk about it here. They're really solely reviewing it based upon criteria. And they're also human beings, thank goodness, but they're reading many grants at one time, so they're also prone to error and missing things, which I think is really important to think about in terms of how can you ensure you do your best to draw their eyes and attention to the criteria that you're checking off. And we can talk about that more as we talk about the different elements specifically on the following sessions. And despite criteria, interpretation always plays a role. So again, you really want to think about doing your best to draw their attention to criteria that they're checking to see if you addressed in the different individual elements. And as a peer reviewer, their primary responsibility, I'd say the same for the staff review, is to read all the grant applications that they're assigned, to score the applications based on the criteria provided, and to provide some feedback on areas that could be improved and areas that were strong. They're asked not to make judgments based on what they think will or will not work, but to assess each application solely based on what was provided and how well they did to address what was requested. For each of these elements, there are both similar and different areas on which reviewers score your application. I just want to talk through some of these, briefly. So in the narrative, they're reviewing based on the criteria that was issued in the notice and what was requested in each section. So for every section of the narrative that we'll talk more about on the next session, they're reviewing to see if you addressed what was asked to be addressed. In the logic model, same thing. They're looking to see that you address the criteria that was requested in each section. It's a 7-column document. Did you address what you're supposed to address? Does it read well? It's a 7-column document. So does it read well left to right and right to left? Is it plausible and reasonable? Does it convey a strong theory of change? And we'll talk more about that on the next session. For your performance measures, they're wanting to see if it follows the requirements and rules that are outlined in the performance measure instructions, which we'll talk about on a future session. But again, it's important you read those instructions. And does it follow the checklist that was included in the instructions, which we'll also reference again later. And then the budget, again, based on the criteria that was requested in the whole budget and each section of the budget, are there any errors? Are there any non-compliant budget items? Are there concerning cost or concerning non-cost? And then overall, there's some questions reviewers will be asked to consider, like, does each item provide the required and requested detail? Are there any red flags? Are there any items that require some clarification? Maybe it wasn't as clear as it could be. And overall, would you recommend the program for funding based upon what was provided? And finally, your state commission will have an eye on element details around page and character limit. So with the narrative, it can not be more than 10 pages as it prints out in eGrants, and that's including the face sheet. The logic model can not be more than 8 pages as it prints out in eGrants. And each row cannot exceed 4,000 characters. So you could maybe have an 8-page logic model, but if you exceeded the 4,000 characters in one of the rows, then it would not include that content. The performance measures has a 2,000 character max per section, includes spaces. And then the budget, there's some specific character limitations in the position title and purpose fields and the calculation fields, and those also include spaces. So it's important to note that things that exceed the page and character limit will not be read and considered in the scoring. So if your narrative goes past the 10th page as it prints out in eGrants, including the face sheet, that content won't be read and scored. And it's important again to note that if you're over the page limit or if you're over the character limit, you're not going to get like a red flag warning from eGrants. That text just won't be included. Either for the character count, the text won't be included and it'll just be cut off and it won't be read for that reason. And for the page limit, it just won't be read because it exceeds what was requested. So just know your limits and stay within them. And that's why it's important to start early, test your page limits, your character limits to make sure that everything's there that you want to be there. All right, we're going to stop again and see if there are any questions. So whenever you're ready to start working on your grant elements, we want to share a few recommended steps as you begin. So before you begin, our recommendation is that first, you read that notice and associated documents in their entirety, maybe twice, maybe 3 times. I know for me, the details I need to read a few times to make sure I get them all. You may want to highlight things and note things with Post-it notes. Talk to your partners and internal staff about ideas, so strengths of the program and or growth opportunities for next year. So if you're a brand new applicant, you'll want to make sure you talk with internal and external folks to see about what ideas you have for the program and what direction you want the application to go. And if you're an existing program, you really want to take the time before the next grant application to assess like what's worked really well that should continue and what are some areas we need to really work on or make some changes and adjustments with. Assess what did and did not work and what impact that might have specifically on what you submit in the grant application. There's a lot of areas where that could come up. So how can you look at what didn't work and what worked and what that might mean for things that you adjust in the different grant application elements. And then we strongly suggest that you create or you get templates for each of the elements, the narrative, the logic model, the performance measures, and the budget, so that you're working within your own systems, whether it's Word or Excel spreadsheets or Google Docs or however sharing device you use, and do nothing in eGrants until everything's final. Because you also want that record of what was done and written, in addition to you want to edit and make changes in those original documents and not in eGrants directly. So you will not enter anything into eGrants until those things are final. And then we really suggest you take those on through learn courses or listen to some of those recordings that AmeriCorps did for this last NOFO they issued. Take advantage of any trainings that your state commission is providing like these. Because the more you take advantage of the learning and hear things multiple times, the easier things will be. And as you start to write your application, particularly the narrative and logic model, we want you to consider a few things. So one of the most important things for you to do in your grant application is what I call telling your Ameri story or your AmeriCorps story. You want to be able to convince the reviewers that you have something compelling you are trying to address, and you have a set of activities that you believe will help to move the needle on the problems. In the current AmeriCorps application, there are two particular areas that tell that story of your program design in a larger way, and that's your narrative and your logic model. And this can be one of the most confusing parts, I think, of the application, where people struggle with understanding how they fit together. So we're going to talk more about these on the second session, but we want to introduce it here so we set you up for better understanding in the next session. So for your what we call program design, or what we call your theory of change, like what you believe will help to address the problems you've outlined, there are two pieces that are reviewed for the full points in your application, but also two pieces that are reviewed to tell your AmeriCorps story. And that's the first section of the narrative and the logic model document. That first section of the narrative is called Community and Logic Model in the current Notice of Funding Opportunity. Again, we're going to come back to that on the next session and talk more in detail about that. We're not going to talk about today the details of the narrative, as that again changes year to year, but we want to talk about some writing tips regardless of what's being asked. So again, first, we recommend highly that you create a template based upon the NOFO sections or the Serve Washington's notice sections and criteria, and have clear and accurate area and section headings. So there's a few different areas in the narrative and then a few different subsections of those areas, and you should have those clear sections. eGrants doesn't take bold or underline or italics, so I always like to do things in all caps if I want it to stand out. And then we suggest strongly that you use active voice, like be really forward and succinct with your voice, and cut down extra words. So use that good, strong, active voice language. Every little word sometimes counts when we're trying to get within the 10-page limit. Avoid jargon and technical language that, or again, a reviewer who knows nothing about the work you do would not understand. Be as clear and concise as you can, and really avoid parroting. I call this parroting because you're like a parrot. You just state exactly what the application asks you to state. Now, I do suggest with each section, like if there's a criteria that's asked for in each section, you maybe have an intro sentence that somewhat parrots that criteria. So again, how does a reviewer know, oh, okay, they're addressing this criteria? You start that paragraph off with a sentence that says language of that criteria, but you need to go into more details. You just can't say you did it. And that's it. Don't write things that sound more like they're just inserted to serve as a checkoff. It's really obvious. I read probably 100 grants a year. And I can really tell when someone's just trying to check off a box versus something that's really integral and true to what the program is either trying to do or currently does. So it's really important that you be real and honest with what you're trying to address in the criteria versus try to make something up. And then provide details, data, information. Reviewers are reviewing that criteria to say, did you provide the details that satisfactorily say, yes, indeed, you are doing this? So not, just say you're doing it, but again, that who, how, what, why, when, where, as much as you can within the page constraints. Check your spelling. I can't say that enough, especially with the word AmeriCorps. I can't even begin to tell you how many AmeriCorps grant applications I've read where AmeriCorps is not spelled correctly. And that just tells me someone doesn't have the care and detailed eye that they're going to need as a full operational AmeriCorps program too. And like we said before, do your things in Word or your Google Doc or your spreadsheet or some other sharing system. Never, ever, never, ever, never, ever do things directly in eGrants, and never make your edits in eGrants, make them in your original documents, and then recopy and paste into eGrants. And then now I always suggest just put your thoughts down on paper without worrying about the page limits and character counts first. You can come back and cut, but don't constrict yourself. Just put it all down on paper first, and then you can massage it and wordsmith it. And now we want to talk about a few things that you can do to provide, as you approach the deadline, some recommendations. And I know there's some questions coming up, so we'll address them in a few minutes. First, it's important to get as many eyes on your application as possible. When the primary person is immersed in the grant so much, they oftentimes don't see what's missing or what's not as strong as it could be because they've been in it for so long. So get as many eyes on as you can, especially those folks that have a real good critical eye. Those are the people you want to review. Second, test your page limits and your character limits, I'd say at least a week before final submission. Put them into eGrants, do a printout, see if your narrative is within the page limit, see if your logic model and your performance measures and your budget include all the text you intended it to include. Because again, if you exceed the character limit, it just won't include that text, and you won't know it unless you look at it and do a double check. And then do a final review to ensure that you've checked off all the requirements. We are going to be providing you all a sample checklist that you all could use as a guide. You could create your own using that one as a suggestion. So we'll send that out as a follow-up. And then as we wrap up some Grants 101, before we turn it over to talk about some of the budget elements, we want to talk about a few reminders. And then we'll stop to see what questions are being asked. So the first thing I really like to mention is that your grant is what I would think of as your closet. Everything that's within that closet, all the grant elements, ultimately determine what's allowable. It's really important to understand that if it's not within that closet, if it's not within those grant elements that we've been talking about for this session, or not reasonable based upon what's in those grant elements, it's essentially not allowable. So you all need to make sure that you take this application and all of its elements super seriously, which I know you will, but to make sure, take that step back and ensure that everything you all do or considering doing as much as you can is within that closet and all the elements. So that's one important thing. There's also some common mistakes to avoid. I can't even begin. Every year I see it. Organizations that are entering into eGrants at the last minute. I've had some organizations that have clicked that final button 30 seconds before the deadline. It's stressful, and that's where mistakes are made. So you really want to try to avoid that, and at least a week in advance, I'd say start doing your testing and getting everything finalized. Making sure you follow those instructions, and that checklist is a good tool to help you do that. Your page limits, your character counts, your formatting on the additional documents, your anything, you want to make sure you do that double check and you're not missing anything that could either affect the scoring of your application or your ability to get funding. And then don't overlook the importance of proofreading and editing. That's just super important. And then within eGrants, make sure that your SAM registration information exactly matches your eGrants information. Again, always start with those documents in Word or Excel. Enter that a week before the due date. The earlier, the better. Test those page and character counts. I'm here to tell you, I've only met maybe one or two organizations that have never had to cut anything. You'll have to cut something, and that's okay. That's just the normal process. So doing that testing as early as you can, so then you can start to make decisions about what you cut is super important. All right, so before I turn over to Jennifer, I just want to pause and see what questions came up because I think I saw a few.
There's more comments, Amy.
No, that's okay. Oh, no, not at all. It happens. We're a learning community and we're a non-judgment zone. Are there any other questions? All right, I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer, who's going to wrap us up with understanding the AmeriCorps budget.
All right, everyone. From this point forward, we're just going to touch on a few items in relation to the budget and go into much more detail on our last webinar session. There you go. At the heart of AmeriCorps, it's just important to understand that this is really a people grant and not a money grant. In other words, you're going to receive funds to support individuals serving their communities, but the federal funds you receive will not support all of the costs necessary to run a high quality program. AmeriCorps only supplies a portion of the necessary dollars to run that high quality program. We're going to review a couple of concepts that are important in relation to the budget. For the AmeriCorps grant, there are two main time periods. And the first period of time is the budget year, which is the 12-month period of time that you receive your grant for. To operate a program, it requires that you have funding for those full 12 months to help with staffing, program costs, member living allowance, etc. The second period of time, excuse me, is the program year, which consists of the time frame in which your AmeriCorps members serve their service term. That could be 3 months, that could be 8 months. That is up to you based on your program design. Organizations have to design their program with these AmeriCorps member terms of service that fall somewhere within that 12-month budget period. It is generally recommended that programs do not have members serve for a full 12 months, just to allow program staff time to recruit the next core, evaluate the current program year, and prepare for the upcoming program year. It's also important to note that members cannot serve more than 12 months unless they were suspended during their term of service. Right. The next concept we're going to discuss is program budget versus grant budget. The program budget is all expenses necessary to run a high quality AmeriCorps program. It is literally every anticipated expense that you have. Since AmeriCorps programs are limited to the amount of federal dollars that they can request, and there is no benefit for programs to overmatch, you don't get extra points in your grant application or anything if you are overmatching on the grantee side of your budget. It is very likely, especially for new programs, that your grant budget will be a subset of your program budget. In your grant budget, you can include $0 line items to describe the additional items that are being provided to the program, but not have any actual cost allocated either to the federal side, what we call the CNCS side of your budget, or the grantee side, which is the match side of your budget. In the final webinar in this series, we'll discuss this in more depth. And then the next concept to consider is looking at your budget as a team effort. Budgets are a program's best educated guess of the necessary expenses to run the AmeriCorps program for a grant year at the time of your grant submission. It's important that the budget's a team effort to ensure the most accurate representation of the expenses necessary to run the program. This means including a number of individuals or departments in creating and or reviewing the budget. Some of those individuals or departments that could be included in this process are agency leaders or department heads, accounting staff or department, HR staff or department, or site staff, where you are placing the staff from the locations that you will be placing AmeriCorps members at. This is especially important in regards to any host site fees that will be collected to support the program required match. Additionally, these individuals should not only be working with the AmeriCorps staff during the application process, but during the entire program year, from grant implementation to grant closeout. It's important that there is strong communication, especially between your accounting finance office and the AmeriCorps program staff, to ensure strong checks and balances in relation to that grant spending. And then finally, once the team that will be working on the budget's been identified, excuse me, they need to think through all of the program elements that will need to be incorporated into the budget. The budget as a whole can be thought of as a house with all the individual expenses, the items you utilize to make the house more than 4 walls, like doors, windows, furniture, plumbing, electricity, etc. It's really important to think through what is required in the budget to ensure a strong foundation for a high quality program. So some of the areas to think about that should be brought into the house include member costs, such as living allowance, healthcare if it's applicable, FICA, workers' comp or AD&D, member assistance program, compliance costs, NSCHC costs, or National Service Criminal History Check costs. There are specific requirements for AmeriCorps programs in relation to criminal history checks, member gear, any required budget line items per the notice of funding opportunity, technology, like what technology do you need for timekeeping, data reporting? Do staff need cell phones, laptops, etc.? Staffing, and then training. And when we think of training, we need to think of training in terms of both staff, members, and sites. How are you going to develop and monitor your site? And then outreach and recruitment, not just for members, but also for your staff and site. And retention, how are you going to retain your members? How are you going to retain your sites? Any costs associated with that? And then lastly, data collection and evidence building. This is not an end-all be-all list, but these are just some of the areas that you have to think through that should be included in your budget or thought about in relation to your budget. Okay. As I said, that's just a quick introduction to the kind of starting to think about the budget development. We'll go into much more detail on the last webinar. But as we kind of wrap up this session, do you have any questions? Any questions?
Hi, I have a question. This is Amy Brown from Washington Campus Coalition. I just wanted to clarify the budget period versus the program period. My understanding from that is that the members must serve within that same 12-month budget period, which is different than how we've been managing that with our state and national grants, where members can enroll during that budget period. So we have members, for example, still serving that are part of the 23-24 program year that just enrolled by July 31st. And what I'm understanding is you're saying that's not allowed with your program. Is that correct?
It is allowed with what's called a no-cost extension. I will say I am not, and Serve Washington may have a completely different take. I am not a fan of a no-cost extension. A no-cost extension means you are running 2 grants at the same time, 2 sets of data, 2 budgets at the same time, and it gets very complicated for programs. If you have a no-cost extension, then that is true. You can enroll members within that budget period, and they could be serving outside of that. But to me, then some other things may need to be addressed, such as recruitment or retention or even slot conversion to prevent a continuous cycle of no-cost extensions, which isn't necessarily beneficial to your sites or your program overall.
Okay, yeah, our sites have requested more flexibility as to the start and end dates, which is why we've done it, and we're really used to it. So, but you're saying that it's less likely to be funded, is what I'm hearing, if that is part of our program plan.
It's most likely you would not outline that in your program plan in terms of your grant application. They don't ask for that specifically within your grant application. So it shouldn't have an impact on your funding unless Serve Washington changes their policies and procedures around no cost extensions.
All right, thanks so much.
You're welcome. Great question. Other questions? Okay, Amy, if we can go to that last slide. All right, so just as a reminder of our upcoming webinars, our next one is on February 19th at 11 Pacific, and we'll be talking about your program design, specifically narrative, logic, model, theory of change. Then our following one is March 5th, same time, performance measures and evaluation, and we will wrap up with our last one on March 19th on the budget nuts and bolts. All right. We'll stay on for a few more minutes in case there's any other questions, but otherwise we appreciate your attendance today and hope this was helpful and hope to see you on future webinars.
I have a quick question. Jessica Sagdahl from Serve Tri-Cities. From what I'm understanding and some timelines, which we haven't got the official timeline on when the NOFO comes out for formula. From what I'm seeing is I'm so thankful for this and a lot of information came through, which is great, but the grant might be coming out before we're done with this series or might be ending before we're done with this series. Am I correct with that timeline?
I can chime in here, Jessica, and
Sure.
for everyone who's still on the call. So I'm currently working on that RFGA as we speak, and
Okay.
typically AmeriCorps sends out some guiding information as far as what our due date will be to them, and then I think the commission typically bases due dates off that. They have not sent out any instructions yet this year, so I'm just going to go ahead and wing it for now unless instructions come in the next couple of days. So to the best of my knowledge, that due date for grant applications to serve Washington should be right around the end of March. So
Oh, okay.
possibly like that last Friday in March. Don't quote me on that, but that's
Sure.
the plan as of 11:59 today.
That is great. That is great news, Diane. Thank you. It makes me feel better because I got so much info from just this first session that I feel like I'm just gonna have a better application
Yeah.
after series. So thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Any other questions? All right, again, we'll hang on for a few more minutes. Otherwise, feel free to jump out of the Zoom meeting room and we'll see you all in 2 weeks.
Amy, I was late coming to the meeting. Was there a way that we were supposed to check in, or is it just noted that I arrived, or?
I don't know, Lou or Diana, are y'all taking notice of anything or is there anything that they need to do?
Nope, I think we're good, Michelle.
Okay, thank you.
And if you didn't hear, we'll be sharing slides and a checklist and the recording will be provided to you all. So if you miss anything, you could listen to it afterwards.
Okay, thanks, Amy.
You're welcome.
Bye.
Bye.
And with that, I think I will go ahead and stop recording.
Mhm.